Iron Haven wasn't a city you lived in. It was a city you endured. It was a harsh, sprawling port where the smell of welded steel and cold Atlantic salt clung to the air, embedding itself deep in the lungs. Tonight, the rain wasn't just falling, it was drilling, a relentless percussion against the corrugated tin roofs of the wharf. Inside the Salt and Ember, a 24/7 diner bolted to the edge of the pier, the fluorescent lights hummed a weary tune, casting everything in a harsh, sterile glow. It smelled of old grease, burnt coffee, and the damp wool of the few dock workers nursing mugs at the counter. Mira Vale, 26 years old, was running on 8 hours of sleep stretched over 2 days. She moved with an economy of motion, refilling coffee pots and wiping down counters, her apron stained with the ghosts of 1,000 orders. As she cleared a plate, her faded gray sleeve hitched up, revealing a thin, white line across the delicate skin of her wrist. It was pale as a fishbone, a scar she kept hidden, the only souvenir from a life she had spent her last 10 years trying to outrun. She paused by the register, counting the crumpled bills and heavy quarters in her tip jar. Her lips moved silently, tallying the meager sum. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. The rent for her tiny apartment in the old ferry district was due. And worse, the bill for her foster mother's medication was waiting. The woman who had taken her in when the system spat her out now had lungs as fragile as wet paper, and Mira was the only thing standing between her and the cold Iron Haven damp. The booth in the dark corner erupted in loud, grating laughter. 3 men. They were regulars, only in the sense that they occupied the same space every Tuesday, the members of the local black cod crew. They were low-level parasites who fed on the scraps of the port, and tonight their attention was fixed on Mira. "Hey, sweetness," one of them called out, his voice oily and thick. He leaned back, hooking a thumb in his belt. "This coffee's cold. Why don't you come warm it up for us?" His companion snickered. Mira's shoulders tensed, but her expression remained perfectly, professionally blank. This was the skill of the late-night shift invisibility. You made yourself functional, forgettable. You became part of the background, too boring to bother, too efficient to break. "Right away," she said, her voice flat, devoid of the anger simmering beneath her breastbone. She grabbed the hot pot, walked over, and refilled their mugs, her eyes fixed on the dark liquid, ignoring the way their stares crawled over her. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," the leader slurred, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist, the one with the scar. Before his fingers could close, the bell above the diner door chimed, a sharp, clear sound that cut through the thick air. The rain swept in, a cold mist that preceded the man who filled the doorway. He paused for a beat, framed by the buzzing red neon sign outside, the water dripping from the hem of his long, dark wool coat to pool on the worn linoleum. He was tall, his stillness absolute. The diner, which had been humming with low chatter and the hiss of the grill, fell utterly silent. This was Cassian Drago. He was a name spoken only in low tones in Iron Haven, a man who moved through the city's underbelly with the lethal precision of a surgeon's blade. He was charisma and cold calculation, and he was, shockingly, alone. His gaze swept the room once. It wasn't threatening, it was worse. It was assessing, a heavy weight that cataloged everything. His eyes passed over the weary truckers, the cook leaning in the kitchen window, and finally, they settled on the corner booth. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just looked. The man holding Mira's arm froze, his face draining of color. The laughter of the black cod crew died instantly, choked in their throats. It was as if an invisible signal had been given, a frequency only they could hear. The leader's hand snapped back as if burned. "We were just leaving," he mumbled, throwing a few crumpled bills onto the table. In seconds, the 3 men were out of the booth, shuffling past the counter, their eyes averted from the man at the door. They pushed back out into the storm, vanishing like phantoms. The silence they left behind was heavier than their noise had been. Cassian Drago let the door click shut. He moved with a quiet grace, the wet wool of his coat smelling of the cold ocean as he passed. He slid onto the stool at the far end of the counter, the one cloaked in shadows. Mira pulled her sleeve down, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She grabbed a clean mug, her hand miraculously steady. "Black, no sugar," he said. His voice was low, like gravel pulled from the harbor floor. She poured. The dark stream was the only thing moving in the diner. She set the mug down in front of him on a clean napkin. She didn't look at his face, but she saw his hand as it closed around the warm ceramic. The knuckles were scarred, the fingers long and calloused. This was not the hand of a man who sat behind a desk. For a long moment, the only sounds were the rain hammering the roof and the low buzz of the clock. He took a slow sip, his gaze fixed on the rain-lashed street outside. "You planning on staying here?" he asked, his voice soft, yet it cut through the room. The question caught Mira off guard. It wasn't small talk. It wasn't a line. It felt like an interrogation, a question that sought to strip her bare, right down to the bone. And he was asking about the diner, about Ironhaven, about the life that was slowly grinding her down. Mira finished polishing a glass until it squeaked. She forced a smile, the thin, brittle one she reserved for difficult customers and impossible situations. "The rent gets paid," she evaded. He turned his head then, and his eyes met hers. They were dark, impossible to read, and they saw everything. They saw the tremor she was hiding, the scar on her wrist, the exhaustion in her shoulders. He finished the coffee in one long swallow, the gesture final. He pushed the mug forward and stood. From his pocket, he pulled a thick fold of cash and dropped it onto the counter. Mira glanced down. It was a staggering amount, at least $300 bills, maybe more, for a $2 coffee. "Keep it," he said. He moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the brass handle. The cold air rushed in around his ankles. "Don't let anyone print on you again." He didn't wait for a response. He was gone, swallowed by the storm as quickly as he had appeared. Mira stared at the money. Her breath caught in her throat. "Don't let anyone print on you." He had seen it. He had seen the way the Black Cod crew had tried to leave their mark on her, staking a claim. She rushed to the window, wiping the condensation away with her apron. She saw him walking down the pier, his head bent against the wind, a solitary figure moving through the deluge. Across the street, parked in the deep shadow of a loading crane, sat a sleek, black sedan she hadn't noticed before. Two men sat in the front seat, visible only as silhouettes. They were his, she knew, his bodyguards, and they hadn't moved, they hadn't followed him in. He had walked into her diner, into that tense, volatile situation, completely, devastatingly alone. The night finally wound down. The hiss of the grill went quiet. The last truck rumbled away from the loading bay. Mira stacked the change, the heavy, crisp bills from Drago burning a hole in her apron. Outside, a distant engine thrummed, the deep bass note of a container ship navigating the channel, heading out to the open sea. The smell of diesel smoke mingled with the cold, bitter coffee left in the pot. A new trajectory had just been set, and Mira Vale, the girl who had spent a lifetime trying to be invisible, was being pulled into the dark, swirling vortex of Ironhaven. The next night, the Salt and Ember was a tomb. The rain had paused, but the air was heavy and damp, and the piers were unnervingly silent. The Helios Anti-Corruption Bureau was in town, a phantom agency that descended on Ironhaven every few months, and their presence choked the life out of the port. Cops, real or otherwise, made everyone nervous. The diner was empty, save for Mira and the low, agonizing hum of the cooler. Just after 2 a.m., the bell chimed. Cassian Drago entered as quietly as he had the night before. His guard was absent. The heavy wool coat was gone, replaced by a simple, dark cashmere sweater that did nothing to hide the breadth of his shoulders. He looked less like a specter and more like a man, which was somehow more dangerous. He took the same stool at the end of the counter. Mira felt the air shift, the oxygen in the small diner suddenly becoming thin. She picked up a clean mug. "Black, no sugar," she said, her voice sounding too loud in the quiet. He nodded, and as he rested his hands on the formica, she saw it. The back of his right hand was a fresh wound. The skin over his knuckles was split and scraped raw, oozing dark blood that looked black in the low light. It was new, hours old at most. Mira froze for only a second, then, instinct, the same instinct that made her count tips and check the locks, took over. She set the mug down and ducked below the counter, retrieving the battered metal first aid kit. It was rusty at the hinges and smelled of iodine and old tape. She placed it on the counter and clicked it open. He watched her, his expression unreadable, as she pulled out a bottle of antiseptic and a roll of clean gauze. "May I?" she asked. He didn't answer, but he turned his hand over, palm up, in a gesture of concession. Her touch was light, practiced. She poured the stinging liquid onto a sterile pad, her movements economical and precise. He didn't flinch as she cleaned the wound, her fingers gently brushing away the grit, the sharp, chemical smell of the antiseptic mixed with the aroma of the coffee. He was so still. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin. As she leaned in to wrap the gauze, his breath stirred the fine hairs at her temple. It was warm, and it made her shiver. She taped the bandage, her work neat. "You should have this looked at," she said softly, her eyes on her own hands. "It's been looked at," he replied, his voice a low rumble. She began packing the kit away, the silence stretching taut between them. He hadn't touched his coffee. "Why do you stay in Ironhaven?" he asked. The question was like his gaze last night, stripping away her defenses. He didn't ask what she was running from or how long she'd been here. He asked why. Mira snapped the kit shut. "It's the last place anyone would look for me," she said. It was a half-truth, but it was the most honest thing she'd said to anyone in years. "And are they still looking?" "I live like they are." He absorbed that, his dark eyes fixed on her. He seemed to understand the weight of that life, the constant looking over her shoulder, the practiced invisibility. "The rain stopped," she said, needing to change the subject, needing air. "I'm going to check the porch." He stood as she walked to the door, following her. She stepped out onto the small wooden deck that overhung the black water. The air was thick with the smell of ozone left by the storm and the sharp, metallic tang of machine oil from a nearby tanker. Across the channel, a harbor patrol boat's searchlight swept the darkness, its white beam slicing across the hulls of sleeping freighters. She gripped the damp railing, breathing in the cold, clean salt. "It's not a place for someone like you," he said, standing a few feet away. "You don't know anything about me. I know you don't belong here." She turned to face him, a flare of the old anger rising. "And you do. You walk in, and men run. You bleed, and you don't flinch. You're right. I don't belong in that. But this diner, this is mine." He moved then. It wasn't fast, but it was inevitable, closing the small space between them. The weak light from the diner window caught the silver in his dark hair. He stopped just shy of touching her, his presence a palpable force. "You're wrong," he whispered. "This isn't yours. It's just a cage you've learned to clean." Before she could form a reply, he raised his uninjured hand. He didn't grab her. He cupped her jaw, his thumb resting on the pulse that hammered beneath her ear, his calloused palm warm against her skin. It wasn't a claim, it was a question, his eyes searching hers in the gloom. And Mira, who had spent a decade building walls, felt them crumble to dust. She closed her eyes, her lips parting on a shaky breath, her shoulders, which she had held rigid for 10 years, finally relaxed. The kiss was not sweet, it was not gentle, it was desperate, a controlled collision. It was the taste of his black coffee and the cold salt of the sea, a drowning man's last grasp for air. His hold on her jaw firmed, tilting her head back as he deepened the kiss, a low groan vibrating in his chest. The sound of the rain-swollen waves crashing against the pilings below became a curtain, pulling shut around them, sealing them in the dark. The world narrowed, the entire sprawling, dangerous city of Ironhaven shrinking to the few inches of space between their bodies. He was the one who broke it. He pulled back, just a single breath, but it felt like a mile. His hand dropped from her face, clenching into a fist at his side. He stared at her, his chest rising and falling, his eyes a storm of suppressed emotion. "I shouldn't have come back here," he said, his voice harsh. Before Mira could find her own breath, a sound snagged his attention, a low rumble. A heavy-duty pickup truck with no license plates was cruising slowly down the pier. It shouldn't have been there. This area was for foot traffic. The passenger window was down. Mira didn't see the glint of the camera lens, but Cassian did. His jaw hardened, a muscle flexing tight as the truck accelerated, disappearing into the maze of shipping containers. He turned back to Mira, his expression now completely shuttered. The moment of vulnerability was gone, sealed behind steel. "You were right," he said, his voice flat. "They're still looking. And now, they're looking at you, too." He reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out a thin, heavy card. It was matte black plastic, with no name, no number, no magnetic strip, just a blank, solid object. He pressed it into her palm. Her fingers instinctively closed around it. "When you hear the ship's horn," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "3 times in a row, long and loud. Don't think, don't pack, don't ask questions. Just go. The address is coded to the card. It will get you in." He turned and walked back into the diner, tossing a wad of cash onto the counter. He was out the door and gone before she could even say his name. Mira stood on the porch, the cold air seeping into her thin uniform. Her lips still tingled, her entire body thrumming with a dangerous, unfamiliar energy. She looked down at the key card in her hand. It felt heavy, like a weapon. She walked back inside the empty diner, the silence screaming at her. She slipped the card between the pages of her order book, hiding it beneath receipts for coffee and grilled cheese. A shiver ran down her spine, but it wasn't just fear. For the first time in 10 years of running, Mira Vale didn't want to disappear. The tension in Ironhaven shifted from a low hum to a high-pitched whine. It started as whispers in the loading bays and fishing trawlers, a rumor that slithered through the port like bilge water. A new player was in the city, an invisible hand called the Orpheus Task Force. They were hunters, ghosts from the federal mainland, and they were sniffing around the cold storage supply chains. They were looking for the man who controlled the ghost containers, the unregistered cargo that moved through the port like a silent, parallel economy. They were whispering one name, Drago. Mira felt the change before she understood it. The air felt charged, static electricity before a lightning strike. One morning, she found a small, tight bouquet of white flowers on the worn mat outside her apartment door. There was no card. They were sea alyssum, tiny blossoms that smelled sweet and peppery. Down at the docks, they were a signal, a quiet, floral warning. "We are watching you." She threw them in the dumpster, but the scent lingered in her mind. The pressure escalated. At 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 days later, the bell at the Salt and Ember chimed violently. 2 men in crisp dark blue uniforms from the Aegis Metropolitan Authority entered, clipboards in hand. They announced a surprise food safety inspection. It was a performance. They were too aggressive, their movements too sharp. They tore through her walk-in, tossed dry goods onto the floor, and shined flashlights into perfectly clean corners, their questions rapid-fire and accusatory. Mira stood her ground, her voice steady, answering every query with the flat, tired patience of the service industry. As they were leaving, one of them dropped his pen. When Mira bent to retrieve it, she saw something else glinting under the counter stool, a small metal pin. After they left, the diner smelling of their cheap cologne and disruption, she picked it up. It was a badge of some kind, but not Aegis. It was a stylized, circular emblem of a serpent eating its own tail, but the snake was broken, its spine snapped in the middle. The Orpheus Task Force. They weren't just sniffing, they were marking territory. The final warning came the next night. The diner was quiet, the air thick with impending rain. A man in a heavy, dripping raincoat sat at the counter, his face hidden by the shadow of his hood. He didn't order coffee. He ordered an iced tea, a strange request on a cold, damp night. Mira served him. He paid with exact change and left without a word. When Mira cleared the tall, sweating glass, she found a small square of photographic paper stuck to the counter by condensation. She picked it up. Her blood turned to ice. It was a picture of her and Cassian, taken from outside the diner, looking in. It was the moment she had been bandaging his hand, her head bent in concentration, his gaze fixed on her. The angle was voyeuristic, invasive. On the back, written in thick, black ink, were 2 words. "The bait!" Mira's breath hitched. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her throat. The black keycard in her apron pocket suddenly felt like a block of lead. The room was spinning. And then she heard it, cutting through the night. The deep, resonant blast of a container ship's horn. It held for 5 long seconds, a sound that shook the windows in their frames. A pause, then a second identical blast, an agonizing silence, then the third. 3 times in a row. The fear vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp adrenaline. Don't think. Don't pack. She walked to the register, emptied her tip jar into the glass container she kept under the counter, shoving it deep behind the stacks of coffee filters. She grabbed her thin jacket, her keys, and slid her hand into her apron, her fingers closing around the blank, black card. She didn't lock the diner. She just walked out, a shadow slipping into the misty alleyways, moving toward the dark water. Pier 17 was a skeleton of rusted cranes and empty moorings. A single car sat at the end of the pier, engine idling. It was an old, beaten-up coupe, its paint scarred and its body showing rust. It was the most forgettable car in Ironhaven. She approached, and the passenger door swung open. The driver was a woman. She was small, compact, with a sharp, pixie-like face and eyes the color of forged steel. She didn't speak. She just watched Mira in the rearview mirror, her expression a mask of absolute calm. This was Juno Pike. Mira slid in. The inside of the car smelled of oil and old leather. Juno put the car in gear, and they moved. Gliding through the back roads of the port without headlights, they passed through the container yard, a canyon of stacked, colored steel. In the distance, a column of orange light lit up the sky, painting the low-hanging clouds a sickly yellow. A fire. "What is that?" Mira whispered. Juno tapped her radio. A small handheld unit bolted to the dash, 3 short, sharp taps. A metallic voice crackled back. "Deep water. The cod is cooked." Juno glanced at Mira, her gaze unwavering. Mira understood. The black cod. Their cold storage warehouse. Cassian's response to the photo. Juno navigated the car into a derelict warehouse district, the buildings dark and hollowed out. She parked in the shadow of a massive, silent factory and led Mira to a steel door, up 3 flights of rattling metal stairs. They emerged into a large, open loft. It was a safe, flat, but barely. A folded cot in the corner, a military-grade medical kit on a small table, a single-burner hot plate, and nothing else. Cassian Drago stood in the center of the room, his back to them. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, and he was staring at a massive, detailed map of the Ironhaven port spread across a drafting table. He didn't turn when they entered. "They'll use you for leverage," he said, his voice flat, his eyes still tracing the shipping lanes on the map. "They think you're a weakness they can press. I don't bargain with that." He tapped the map, near the area that was now burning. "I choose to put out the fire." He finally turned, his eyes finding hers. They were cold, focused, and utterly devoid of the warmth she'd felt on the porch. This was the man who commanded the shadows. Mira's fear coalesced into a single, hard point of defiance. "I have to go back." His expression hardened. "You're here now. You're safe." "No," she insisted, her voice shaking but firm. "My foster mother. There's a picture of her in my apartment. It's the only one I have. I am not leaving it." "It's a thing, Mira. It's not worth your life." "It is to me," she shot back, her chin high. "You don't understand. I'm not that bait. I'm not a piece you move. I am going back for it." He stared at her for a long, silent moment, a flicker of something annoyance, or perhaps respect in his dark eyes. He grabbed his coat from the cot. "Fine. We go together. Juno, wait for the signal." The trip back was a blur of shadows and adrenaline. They entered her building's stairwell, the air thick and smelling of dust and old paint. As they reached the second-floor landing, a shape detached itself from the darkness. A man, all in black, moved with a sudden, vicious speed. A blade flashed, arcing toward Mira's stomach. Time seemed to slow. Cassian didn't reach for a gun. He moved inside the attack, his body a fluid, brutal engine. His left hand deflected the man's wrist, the sound of bone striking bone echoing in the stairwell. His right hand drove, not a punch, but a solid, short jab of his palm, striking the attacker's chin with a sickening snap. As the man staggered, Cassian hooked his leg, sweeping the man's feet from under him. The man collapsed in a heap, the knife clattering on the concrete. He didn't move. 3 moves, 3 seconds, utterly silent. Cassian didn't even look at the man, and he just looked at Mira, who was pressed against the wall, her heart trying to escape her chest. "You stop the threat," he said, his voice level, as if he were teaching her how to poach an egg. "You don't fight, you end it." He nodded toward her apartment door. "Get the picture." The loft was a metal drum, and the storm was the drummer. Rain lashed against the corrugated tin roof with a relentless, deafening rhythm. Hours had passed. Mira sat on the floor, her knees drawn to her chest, the framed photo of her foster mother clutched in her hand. Cassian stood at the single, grimy window, a motionless silhouette against the gray, turbulent sky. Then, with a metallic groan and a pop, the single overhead bulb died. The loft plunged into an oppressive darkness, the sound of the rain instantly becoming louder, more violent. Mira flinched, her hand tightening on the photo frame. "It's just the grid," Cassian's voice came from the darkness, calm and low. "The whole district is probably out." She heard a click, and a thin, yellow beam of light cut through the room, a heavy-duty flashlight. He placed it on the map table, aiming it at the ceiling. The reflected glow cast the room in a warm, flickering amber, creating an island of light in the dark. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall opposite her. The cold from the concrete floor seeped through her jeans, and she shivered. He saw it. "Come here," he said. It wasn't an order, just a statement of fact. "Closer to the center. It's warmer." She hesitated, then shuffled a few feet, sitting with her back against a wooden support beam. He mirrored her, moving to the beam opposite. They sat facing each other, their knees almost touching in the small circle of light. The cold made them huddle, shrinking the space between them. "Lennox Island," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was quiet, introspective. "That's where I grew up. My mother taught me how to mend fishing nets. She used to say, 'The steel in your heart is fine, Cassian, just don't let it rust.'" Mira watched his face in the flickering light. The shadows softened the hard lines, making him look younger. "My father," he continued, his gaze distant. "He saw the port differently. He turned it into a blood-soaked ledger, taught me how to read it, how to balance it." "And your mother?" Mira asked softly. "The rust got to her," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, which was more revealing than any breakdown. Mira felt a familiar ache of shared loss. "I was in Northbridge," she found herself saying, the words tumbling out into the safe, dark space. The foster system. I had so many names, so many houses. I used to dream of having just one name, one that I didn't have to change every time I moved, one that meant I belonged somewhere. She looked down at the photo in her lap. She was the only one who let me keep mine. The silence that followed was comfortable, a shared understanding of lives shaped by loss. "We should eat," Cassian said, standing abruptly. He rummaged in a crate with the flashlight, emerging with 2 cans of soup and a hot plate connected to a battery pack. He found a small pot and a can opener. He struggled with the opener for a moment, his large, scarred hands awkward with the small, domestic tool. Mira got to her knees. "Here," she said. She took it from him, opening the can with a few practiced twists. She poured the soup into the pot and set it on the burner. When it was hot, he poured it into 2 tin mugs. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing hers. She took a sip and recoiled, the metal scalding her lip. He chuckled. It was a low, rusty sound, as if the mechanism was rarely used. "You're supposed to blow on it," he said. "Nobody told me the mafia etiquette for canned soup," she retorted, a small smile touching her lips. He picked up a plastic spoon, but as he dipped it in, his movements were too sharp, threatening to slosh the hot liquid over the rim. Mira reached out, her hand closing over his, guiding it. "Slowly," she whispered. "Rotate the spoon gently. Don't splash." His hand, the one that had ended a man's life in 3 moves, was completely still under her gentle guidance. He looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. The space between them crackled. They both laughed, a quiet, sudden burst of sound that was immediately swallowed by the storm. It was the most normal, human moment Mira had felt in a decade. The laughter faded, but the charge remained. The beam of the flashlight was growing dimmer, the battery fading, the shadows deepened, closing in around them. He set his mug down. He didn't move toward her, but his gaze held hers, intense and searching. In the near darkness, he raised his hand, the one she had bandaged, and lightly brushed his knuckles along her jaw. His touch was rough, but incredibly gentle. He stopped, his eyes asking the question his lips did not. Mira felt her breath catch. This was her choice. She wasn't bait. She wasn't a pawn. She made a decision. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That was all he needed. He leaned in, and his mouth found hers. It was not the desperate, drowning kiss on the pier. This was slow, deliberate, a discovery. It was the taste of tin and cheap tomato soup, and it was the most profound kiss of her life. His other hand came up, splaying against the small of her back, not pulling her, but anchoring her, holding her steady. Her hands found his shoulders, gripping the thick fabric of his sweater. The kiss deepened, and a low sound rumbled in his chest. Her back pressed against the warm, solid wood of the support beam. "Here," he whispered against her mouth, his breath hot. "You're safe here." Her heart hammered, a frantic, wild bird in her chest, but for the first time, it wasn't from fear. It was a matched rhythm with his, a driving beat in the dark. The scent of him, clean skin and the faint metallic smell of the rain on his coat, filled her senses. This was not about power. It was about shelter. He pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. They stayed that way, breathing each other in, their bodies aligned, the storm raging outside their small, warm bubble. "I can't promise you peace, Mira," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "I don't know what that is, but I promise I will always stand in front of the storm." They eventually lay down on the cot, the only soft surface in the room. They lay on their sides, fully clothed, facing each other, the cooling mugs of soup forgotten. He didn't let her go, his arm draped protectively over her waist, their foreheads touching. Just as exhaustion began to claim her, the flashlight died completely. A second later, the overhead bulb flickered, buzzed, and then blazed to life, flooding the room with harsh, sterile light. The intimacy of the darkness was shattered. They blinked, disoriented. On the table, a small, black device, a pager, began to vibrate, its insistent electronic buzz a violent intrusion. Cassian was on his feet in an instant. He snatched it, his body tense once more. He stared at the small green screen. "What is it?" Mira asked, sitting up. He didn't look at her. He read the text aloud, his voice like ice. Trade the girl for docking rights, Pier 4, midnight. Mira's blood ran cold. The fragile peace was gone. "You're not trading me," she said. It wasn't a question. "I told you," he said, his back to her. "I don't bargain." "Good," Mira said, sliding off the cot. She walked to him, standing at his shoulder, forcing him to look at her. "Because I'm not a bargaining chip. I'm not a piece you get to trade, and I'm not someone you get to put out the fire for. You want to play this game, fine, but I choose my own role." Cassian stared at her, a complex, warring expression on his face. It was half deep, profound worry, and half a sharp, undeniable pride. "This isn't a game, Mira." "Then stop treating me like a pawn you have to protect," she countered, her voice ringing with a new, hard-won authority. "From now on, we set rules. Rule 1, you don't lie to me about the danger, ever." He nodded, his jaw tight. "Agreed." "Rule 2, she said, holding his gaze. "We both get a say. If the risk is too high, if it feels wrong, either one of us can veto. We find another way, together." He looked at her for a long moment, truly seeing the steel that had been forged in her, a steel that hadn't rusted. "Together," he confirmed. It was a new kind of vow. Ironhaven began to feed on a new kind of currency misinformation. The first wave was subtle, a story planted in the gossip columns of the Ironhaven Ledger, a local rag known for its sensationalism. It spoke of a fracture in the Drago organization, a dispute over new assets. It was a lie, carefully crafted by Cassian himself, designed to make his enemies underestimate his control. This was Mira's cue. She was done hiding. Against Cassian's grim-faced reluctance, she walked into the Gull Row fish market at 5 a.m., the busiest, most public part of the port. She wasn't a waitress now. She was a target, deliberately making herself visible. She moved through the slick, ice-covered aisles, the smell of brine and fish guts thick in the air. She bought mackerel, asked about the price of scallops, and felt the eyes on her 3, maybe 4 different sets. The tail was sloppy, which meant they weren't Cassian's. As she left the market, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled away from the curb, following a block behind. She turned onto the narrow, slick cobblestones of Herring Alley. As she reached the midpoint, a rusted delivery van shot out of a blind intersection, its engine roaring, aiming directly for her. Mira didn't even have time to scream. A dark gray car, one she hadn't even registered, materialized from a loading bay, ramming the van with a screech of tortured metal. It T-boned the van, pinning it against a brick wall. Doors opened. 2 men in unmarked, tactical gear emerged from the gray car. They didn't look at Mira. They moved to the van, pulling the dazed driver out. A 3rd man approached her, his footsteps calm and measured. He was tall, with a face that looked carved from tired granite. He wore a simple, well-cut suit under a rain-resistant coat. "Agent Cade Rowan, Orpheus Task Force," he said, his voice smooth and professional. He flashed a badge, the Broken Serpent. "You're lucky we were in the neighborhood. Miss Vale." He knew her name. This was no accident. 2 days later, she sat across from him in a sterile, temporary office above a closed-down bakery. It smelled of stale sugar and industrial cleaner. "We know what you are to him," Rowan said, offering a cup of thin, machine-brewed coffee. Mira declined. "You're in over your head. Drago is the disease this city can't shake. Help us, and you walk away. A new name, a new life, the one you've always wanted." Mira sat with her hands folded in her lap, under the table. Her phone was on, the voice recorder app running silently. "Help you how?" "Testify," Rowan said, leaning forward, his mask of professionalism slipping to reveal the zealot beneath. "Tell us everything. His operations, his safe flats. Give us the man, and we'll give you your freedom." Mira watched him. He was a good liar. But as he said the word freedom, she saw it. The almost imperceptible clenching of his jaw, a slight grinding of his back teeth. It was a micro-expression of profound tension. He wasn't offering freedom. He was setting a different kind of trap. "I'll think about it," she said, standing up. She didn't sign the witness protection forms he pushed across the desk. While Orpheus applied pressure in the shadows, Cassian moved into the light. He held a press conference, a move that stunned the city. He announced the Neo-Dock Fund, a $100 million private investment into rebuilding Iron Haven's failing cold storage infrastructure. He promised clean facilities, new technology, and above all, jobs. The Iron Haven Ledger was skeptical, running a headline, "Drago's blood money buys a clean coat." But down at the docks, among the men who hauled ice and mended nets, the mood was different. It was hope. They lined up for applications, seeing a future, not a criminal. The move infuriated Cassian's true rivals. The Black Cod were gone, but a new, more vicious crew had slithered in to fill the vacuum, the Sawtooth Union. They didn't deal in ghost containers. They dealt in chemicals and synthetics, and they were far more ruthless. Mira, now back at the Salt and Ember by her own insistence, felt their presence first. The diner was her territory, and she knew its every scent. One night, the bleach she used to clean the counters smelled wrong. It was sharper, with a faint, oily, almond-like undertone. Cyanide. Someone had tampered with their supplies. She didn't tell Cassian. She told Juno. Juno, silent and efficient, arrived the next morning disguised as a city inspector. While Mira distracted the day shift cook, Juno installed a new piece of equipment, a commercial stapler for the order tickets. It was heavy, black, and had a pinhole camera lens embedded in its side, aimed directly at the supply closet. They didn't have to wait long. That night, the footage captured the new dishwasher, a quiet kid who never made eye contact, carefully pouring a small vial into a fresh bottle of bleach. Juno didn't take the footage to the Aegis police, who were on Rowan's payroll, or Cassian's. She sent it, encrypted and anonymous, to the one outside agency they all feared, the Helios Anti-Corruption Bureau. Helios didn't make arrests. They made contact. A representative, a woman in a severe suit, met Mira not in an office, but on a bench in the old Ferry District Park. "The Sawtooth Union is a cancer," the woman said, not looking at Mira, "and you've just shown us where to cut. We believe you can find more." She offered Mira a deal, be a shadow witness. No testimony, no public record, just data. Pass them information on Sawtooth, and in return, Helios would ensure the Aegis Authority and the Orpheus Task Force officially classified the Salt and Ember as a non-strategic asset. They would leave it alone. Mira agreed, with one condition: the diner and everyone who works in it. You keep them all safe, untouchable. That night, in the loft, Mira and Cassian laid down their newfound constitution. They wrote it on the back of a bar napkin. 3 rules, their 3 red lines. 1, Cassian said, his voice low. "We don't use children, ever. No messengers, no lookouts. I don't care how desperate we are." 2, Mira added, her pen hovering over the paper. "We don't touch the fishermen or the dock workers, the civilians. This fight stays between the players." And 3, Cassian finished, his eyes meeting hers, a silent acknowledgement of her territory. "No blood is ever spilled in the diner. Not ours, not theirs. It stays clean. It's sanctuary." They had a truce with Helios, a plan for Orpheus, and a strategy for the Sawtooths. For a moment, it felt like they were in control. The next day, a stray container, marked unclaimed, was left on Pier 17, blocking the service road to the diner. When Cassian's men forced it open, the cavernous metal box was empty. Except for one object in the very center, a single, worn wooden stool from the Salt and Ember's counter. Draped over the back, pressed and clean, was one of Mira's gray waitress uniforms. It was a silent, terrifying ultimatum. Cassian stood beside her as they looked at the picture Juno had sent. His face was granite. "They want you to be afraid." Mira stared at the uniform. Her uniform displayed like a hunting trophy. The fear was cold and sharp, but something else was hotter. A burning, cleansing rage. "Then let's show them I'm angry." The dryline yards were a graveyard of industry, a sprawling complex of rust-red warehouses and silent, skeletal cranes. Tonight, it was the Sawtooth Union's primary chemical mixing depot, and Cassian was going to cut it out. The raid was scheduled for 3:15 a.m., the deadest hour of the port's night. Cassian had been absolute, "You are not on the ground team. Mira, veto or no veto." So she sat in the observation tower, a cramped, glass-walled control room perched 4 stories above the warehouse floor, originally used for directing the gantry cranes. Beside her, Juno Pike was a silent statue, her fingers flying over a bank of monitors, monitoring a dozen hijacked security feeds. Mira had the blueprints spread out under a dim gooseneck lamp, a headset connecting her to Cassian's 4-man team. She felt a strange, cold calm. This was not like the diner. This was a different kind of order, a different kind of service. "Alpha Team, hold." She spoke into the mic, her voice even. "You're approaching the west door. Thermal shows 2 guards inside, plus a pressure plate. They've rigged it." Cassian's voice crackled back, low and steady. "Alternate." "The zinc roof, Section 4, Mira said, her finger tracing the map. She read it like she read a complicated dinner order. "It's a patch job. Thin, no sensors. You go in from the top. Juno is looping the yard cams now." "Acknowledged." Going dark. For 3 minutes, the only sound was the wind whistling through the broken glass of the control room. Mira watched the feeds Juno supplied. She saw 4 shadows detach from the roofline and drop into the main mixing bay. "They're in," she breathed. "Beta Team, create diversion at the south gate now." Juno hit a key, and a truck 3 blocks away, packed with fireworks, erupted in a cacophony of light and sound. The feeds showed Sawtooth guards rushing toward the noise. "Alpha, you're clear," Mira said. "Move to storage B." And then the world turned white. A concussive force slammed into their tower, shattering the remaining glass. The explosion wasn't a diversion, it was a trap. The Sawtooths had been waiting. The monitors dissolved into static. The building groaned, a deep, metallic scream. Cassian Mira yelled into the dead headset. Dust and pulverized concrete rained down. Juno grabbed her arm, pointing to a single, flickering monitor that had rebooted. It was an internal camera from the corridor outside Storage B. The roof had collapsed, a tangle of rebar and flaming insulation blocking the primary exit. "Exit 3 is blocked. Route 3 is gone," Mira shouted, knowing he couldn't hear. Through the settling dust on the feed, she saw him. He was pinned behind a row of steel drums, gunfire kicking up sparks all around him. He was cut off, alone. "Juno, get the barge. Get it to the dock. Now," Mira said. Juno gave a sharp nod and vanished down the emergency ladder. Mira looked at the feed, at Cassian taking cover. She looked at the heavy red fire extinguisher mounted by the door. "We both get a say." She broke protocol. She grabbed the heavy cylinder, her muscles straining, and ran for the service ladder. She descended into chaos, the air thick with smoke and the sharp, chemical smell of the fire. Alarms blared, a deafening rhythmic shriek. She hit the ground floor, her feet splashing in water from a broken pipe. The corridor was a 50-yard stretch of smoke-filled hell. At the far end, she could see the muzzle flashes from 2 Sawtooth gunmen. Cassian was trapped just beyond them, on the other side. The gunmen were positioned near a large red utility sensor on the wall. Mira saw it, and a plan formed. Desperate and absolute, she didn't run at them. She ran along the wall, using the deep shadows. She hoisted the extinguisher. With a desperate scream, she swung the heavy cylinder, not at the men, but at the sensor and the cluster of pipes behind it. The metal casing shattered, and a high-pressure valve burst, releasing a deafening hiss and a cloud of thick, white, fire-suppressant fog. The corridor was instantly blinded. "Cassian, now move!" she shrieked, dropping the tank. A dark shape burst through the fog, colliding with her. It was him. His hand grabbed her arm, his grip like a steel vise. He didn't speak. He just hauled her behind the relative safety of a concrete pillar. In the swirling chaos of smoke and screaming alarms, he slammed her back against the concrete, his body shielding hers, his eyes, wild and black in the strobing emergency lights, found hers. He was furious. He was alive. He crashed his mouth down on hers. It wasn't a kiss. It was a spark, a desperate ignition of fuel and air. It was a violent, silent confirmation. You are here. I am here. It lasted no more than a second, a flash of heat in the smoke, a promise to kill for each other. He pulled back, shoving a spare pistol from his hip holster into her hand. Watch our six! He spun, and they were back to back, a single, four-armed entity of survival. He fired controlled, double taps into the fog. She held the pistol with both hands, her arms shaking, watching the corridor behind them. Their heartbeats were a frantic, pounding drum, perfectly in sync with the wail of the sirens. Move, he yelled. They ran, Cassian firing, Mira scrambling to keep up, her eyes stinging. They burst through a set of double doors onto the loading dock. The air was cold, the smell of the river a sudden shock. A flat-topped cargo barge was idling just below, Juno at the helm. Jump! Cassian grabbed Mira around the waist and leaped, landing hard on the steel deck. The barge's engine roared as Juno threw it in reverse, pulling them out into the wide, black channel of the river. They were safe. They were covered in soot, soaked and breathing hard. Mira's hands were bleeding. Cassian had a long gash on his forearm. As they drifted into the middle of the river, the burning warehouse receding behind them, Mira looked up. A new sound, a rhythmic whump, whump, whump. A sleek, black helicopter with no identifying markings hovered high above the city, its searchlight cutting a clean, white cone over the dryline yards. Mira looked at Cassian. His face was grim, his eyes fixed on the aircraft. That's not Sawtooth, he said, his voice low and hard, and it's not Orpheus. The helicopter turned, its light sweeping toward the river. Someone else is at the table. The next morning, the loft smelled of antiseptic and brewing coffee. The encrypted file from Helios had arrived. It wasn't a report, it was a schematic, a blueprint titled Port Crown. It was a vast, intricate web of bribes, shell companies, and kickbacks connecting every corner of Iron Haven's port authority. It showed how money flowed from the gangs, like Sawtooth, up through logistics managers, union bosses, and Aegis police captains. And at the very top, sitting in the center of the web like a bloated spider, was one name, the city transportation commissioner. Cassian stared at the screen, his face a cold, hard mask. His focus shifted, the decision clicking into place like the hammer of a gun. We've been biting at the ankles, he said, his voice quiet, pulling weeds, one by one, while the roots grow deeper. He looked at Mira. I'm done fighting gangs. It's time to dissect the system. Mira looked at the name on the screen, the name of a man who attended charity galas and cut ribbons at new bridge openings. Cassian, she warned, her voice barely a whisper. That's not a man. That's a religion. Touching the port's crown is touching the god of Iron Haven. Agent Rowan reappeared, not with a quiet request, but with the force of the law. He found Mira on the steps of her apartment building as she returned from buying groceries for her foster mother. Two uniformed Aegis officers flanked him, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. Mira Vale, Rowan announced, his voice carrying the impersonal weight of bureaucracy. He held out a folded document. This is an official summons. You are a material witness in a federal investigation. You will come with us. We have a car. Mira's blood ran cold. This was not a request. This was an abduction sanctioned by a badge. I have the right to call a lawyer, she said, her voice betraying a slight tremor. You have the right to comply, Rowan countered, his eyes hard, or you can be arrested for obstruction. Before she could answer, a battered coupe skidded to a halt at the curb. Juno Pike was out of the car, her phone in her hand, the camera lens pointing directly at Rowan. She didn't say a word, but her steel-gray eyes were a silent challenge. Rowan's professional mask twitched. He hated being recorded. He shoved the summons into Mira's hand. "Midnight tonight, room 304, Ironhaven Grand Hotel. Don't be late." He and his officers turned and left, their movements stiff and angry. Back in the loft, Juno took the document from Mira's shaking hand. She didn't read it. She placed it on a high-resolution scanner and blew the image up on her largest monitor. She zoomed in on the official seal of the Orpheus Task Force. She pointed. "What?" Mira asked, leaning in. Juno pointed again, tracing the outline of the broken serpent. Then she pulled up an image of the pin Mira had found in the diner. She toggled between the two. Mira saw it. On the pin, the serpent's head was perfectly aligned with its broken tail. On the summons, the head was misaligned, shifted to the left by perhaps a single millimeter. It was an almost imperceptible flaw. "It's a fake," Mira breathed. "A forgery." "Worse." Cashin's voice came from the doorway. He had been watching, his face dark. "It's a sawtooth trap, and Rowan is the bait. They're not just trying to get to you. They're trying to flush me out." He walked to the map, his back to her. "This is over. I'm sending you to Ashport. Juno can have you on a transport vessel in an hour. New name, new life, the one Rowan promised you. But this one will be real." The words hit Mira like a slap. "No!" "This is not a discussion now," Cashin said, his voice flat. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice rising, vibrating with a new, unfamiliar anger. "I'm not a package you get to ship for its own good. I'm not running again." "You will be dead," he shot back, turning to face her. "You saw the summons. You saw the fire. This is the Port Crown. Mira, they will not stop. They will put a bullet in you just to see what expression I make." "Then let them see," Mira shouted, her hands clenched. "I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of running. This is my home. That diner is my home. I'm not leaving it." She stalked over to the map, her finger jabbing at the blueprint of the Port Crown. "You want to win? You want to change this? Then we do it my way." "Your way," he scoffed. "And what is that hope?" "Transparency," she countered, her eyes blazing. "We release the Port Crown data. We show the city who is really poisoning it. We take your neo-doc fund and we make it a public trust, not a mafia buyout. We stop moving in the dark." It was their first, truly devastating fight. The air in the loft crackled, the unsaid things finally given voice. "You do that, and you paint a target on your own back," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You won't be a shadow. You'll be a martyr. I will not allow that." "You don't get to allow it," she cried. "This is my life, and I am done living it in your safe flat. I am done being your secret." She grabbed her jacket and stormed out, leaving him standing alone in the room, the silence echoing with her words. That night, Mira didn't go to the Ironhaven Grand Hotel. She went home. She walked back to the Salt and Ember, the key feeling heavy in her hand. She unlocked the door, the chime of the bell sounding lonely in the dark. She turned on the lights. She tied on her apron. She started a fresh pot of coffee. At 2 a.m., the usual stragglers, the weary longshoremen and tired tugboat captains, saw the lights and shuffled in, their faces etched with exhaustion. They stopped, surprised to see her. "What'll it be?" she asked, her voice calm. "Mira, you shouldn't be here," one of the old-timers, a man named Sal, whispered, his eyes darting to the dark street. "I know," she said. She turned to the grill, cracked 3 eggs, and threw a slice of ham down. The sizzle was the most beautiful sound in the world. Tonight, everything's on the house. She worked for hours. She poured coffee. She grilled sandwiches. She served slices of pie. She listened as they talked about the shutdown at Pier 17, about the sawtooths shaking down their friends. They didn't just talk to her. They talked with her. They shared intel. They offered warnings. As the first gray light of dawn touched the water, the diner was full. Dozens of men and women, the people who made the port breathe, sat in the booths, nursing hot coffee. As they left, one by one, they paused at the counter. They didn't just leave a tip. They met her gaze, and they gave a short, sharp nod. It was a promise, a choice. The port had picked its side. In the back booth, A young man in a rumpled suit scribbled frantically in a notepad. He had been there all night, watching, listening. He was from the Ironhaven Ledger. Cassian found the newspaper folded on the hood of his car. The headline wasn't about the fire. It wasn't about the Neo Dock Fund. It was a simple, bold title above a grainy photo of Mira sliding a plate of food to a sailor, the daughter of the docks. He read the article, his expression unchanging. The reporter had captured it all: the fear, the loyalty, the quiet defiance. He read how the diner had become a sanctuary, a light in the dark. Cassian finally folded the paper, a slow understanding dawning on his face. He had been trying to win Ironhaven with guns and shadows. Mira was winning it with coffee and trust. Her power wasn't a weapon, it was a shield, and it was stronger than his. He found her on the roof of the diner, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunrise. The air was cold and sharp with salt. The rhythmic lights of the channel buoys blinked in the harbor, like a field of earthbound stars. He didn't apologize, he just stood beside her, handing her a fresh, hot coffee. "If you stay," he said, his voice low, "I change the way I fight." Mira looked up at him, her eyes tired but clear. She leaned her head against his arm. He responded by taking the edge of the thick blanket and wrapping it around them both, pulling her close. The wind whipped at them, salty and cold, but in the shared cocoon, there was only warmth. He tilted her chin up. His kiss was not the desperate spark in the fire, it was the slow, steady warmth of the coffee in her hands. It was an admission. It was a surrender. His lips were soft, his hand gentle in her hair. She sank into him, her hands clasping his, their fingers lacing together. They stood there for a long time, foreheads pressed together, the city waking up below them. "We don't leave each other mid-game," he whispered against her skin. "No," she whispered back, "but I have one more rule." He pulled back just enough to see her eyes. "When you choose violence," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "When we cross that line, it can't be for revenge, it can't be for power. The only reason must be to protect the people down there, the ones with no seat at the table." Cassian looked at her, at the woman who had faced down his world with nothing but a coffee pot and a spine of steel. He saw the future of the port in her eyes. He gave a single, slow nod. It was an Ironhaven oath. Few words, but the price was absolute. The dethrone the crown plan was not about force, it was about finesse. The target was Crown House, a gleaming 25-story glass tower on the waterfront that housed the Port Authority. The prize was the commissioner's Black Ledger, a digital record of every bribe, kept on a secure, air-gapped server in his penthouse office on the 23rd floor. At 2:05 a.m., Mira pushed a janitorial cart into the building's marble lobby. She wore a dull gray uniform, her hair tucked under a baseball cap, her face blank and unremarkable. She was invisible in plain sight, a role she had practiced her whole life. She swiped a cloned keycard, and the service elevator doors opened. Inside stood Cassian, dressed in a blue contractor's jumpsuit with a fake Apex Elevators logo stitched on the chest. He held a metal toolbox and didn't look at her. "Third shift's late," he grumbled to the empty lobby, playing his part. The doors slid shut. Miles away, in a van parked on an overpass, Juno Pike plugged a laptop into a junction box. She didn't just loop the security cameras, she seized control of the building's entire HVAC system. As Cassian and Mira ascended, Juno redirected the building's climate control, pumping condensed, humid air drawn from the sea filters into the ventilation system of the 23rd floor. A fine, artificial sea fog began to mist the penthouse, distorting the camera lenses just enough to blur fine details without triggering a full system alert. The elevator chimed, the doors opened onto a silent, opulent office. The air was thick and damp. Through the mist, they moved like ghosts. Cassian used a bypass key on the commissioner's door while Mira stood watch, her heart a trip hammer. Cassian was inside. 30 seconds later, he was out, a small, black hard drive in his palm. He held it up. Got it. It was too easy. The moment the drive left the server dock, the trap sprung. Steel shutters slammed down over the elevator doors with the sound of a guillotine. The glass doors to the penthouse balcony locked with a heavy, magnetic thud. Red lights began to flash, silent and ominous. They were sealed in. "Juno, what's happening?" Cassian snapped into his comms. Juno's voice was tight. "It's a tertiary system. It's not Aegis. Someone else is in the network, a new firewall. I can't break it." A new player, not the Sawtooths, not Orpheus. This was the someone else from the helicopter. The true power. The consortium of Grey, the shadow coalition of financiers who owned the port, the commissioner, and everyone else. They weren't just protecting their puppet, they were protecting their investment. The main alarm finally blared, a deafening shriek. Plan B. Cassian yelled over the noise. He ran to the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows. He slammed his toolbox against the small emergency release panel. With a pneumatic hiss, the safety protocols engaged. The massive panes of reinforced glass didn't shatter. They unlocked from their frames, designed to be blown out by high-pressure winds. The sudden change in pressure and the strong ocean gale at this height created a vacuum. The wind howled into the room, a violent physical force. Papers, lamps, and chairs were sucked toward the open void. Mira, caught off guard, stumbled on the slick, mist-covered marble floor. She slipped. She was sliding, unable to find purchase, heading straight for the open edge, 23 stories above the unforgiving concrete. She screamed, a sound torn from her throat by the wind. A hand shot out and clamped onto her wrist. Cassian. He had braced himself in the doorframe, a human anchor. He held her, her legs dangling over the edge, the wind whipping her hair across his face. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with pure terror. He didn't strain, he just held her, his grip absolute. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, and in the midst of the hurricane, his voice was perfectly calm. "Trust me." He smiled, a raw, adrenaline-fueled, brilliant smile. A sharp thwack echoed from across the street. A titanium-tipped grappling hook slammed into the steel window frame beside Cassian's head. He didn't flinch. He grabbed the high tensile line, wrapped it around his arm, and clipped a harness to Mira's waist. Juno, perched on the roof of Block B opposite, had fired the line. "Hold on," he yelled. He cut them loose. They swung out into the terrifying open air, a human pendulum arcing between the two buildings. Below them, the first Aegis police sirens began to wail, their blue and red lights painting the street, a swarm of angry hornets. 3 factions, all converging on the same point. They slammed hard into the side of Block B, Cassian's body taking the brunt of the impact. Juno was there, hauling them over the parapet onto the flat, tarred roof. "Service elevator, now." Juno signed, her hands a blur. They ran, Cassian pulling Mira, whose legs were still shaking. They piled into the freight elevator, the doors closing just as they heard shouts from the stairwell. The elevator descended, its slow, grinding pace and agony. When the doors opened on the ground floor loading bay, they weren't alone. Agent Cade Rowan stood there, his gun not drawn. He was alone, and for the first time, Mira saw him clearly. He wasn't a zealot. He was terrified. His face was pale, his hands visibly shaking. He wasn't the hunter. He was just another cog in the consortium's machine. "They locked me out," Rowan whispered, his voice hoarse. "They knew. They let you do it just to trap you. Give me the drive, Drago. It's the only thing they want. Leave it and save your lives." Cassian looked at Mira, a silent question. This was her call. Mira stepped forward. She looked Rowan in the eye, seeing the man who was in just as deep as she was, but on the wrong side. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a hard drive. "Here, take it. Get out." Rowan snatched it, relief flooding his features. Go! Go! I'll stall them!" He ran toward the front lobby, a man given an 11th hour reprieve. The 3 of them slipped out the loading bay door into the alley. As they rounded the corner, Cassian looked at Mira, his expression confused. "That was a copy." "I know," Mira said. "It's loaded with a trace and corrupt script. The moment he plugs it into the consortium's network, it'll create chaos, but it won't lead back to us." "You saved his face," Cassian said, a note of wonder in his voice. "I saved a piece on the board," Mira corrected him, her voice hard. "Tomorrow, we'll need an Aegis cop who's desperate, compromised, and useful. We don't need another monster." An hour later, a crate of ice mackerel was loaded onto a fishing trawler. Tucked inside a waterproof bag at the bottom was the real Port Crown hard drive. It made its way to the Helios Anti-Corruption Bureau, delivered by a fisherman who owed Cassian his boat. The conditions were delivered by anonymous text full, unredacted publication of the Port Crown ledger. In exchange, the source, the method, and the location would remain anonymous, and the Salt and Ember Diner and the Fishermen of Gull Row were to be designated protected civilian entities, immune from all agency blowback. 2 days later, the Ironhaven Ledger published the entire list. The city exploded. The commissioner, the police chief, union bosses, logistics managers. It was a roadmap of corruption that touched every powerful office in the city. Ironhaven didn't just shudder, it broke. The entire power structure was decapitated in a single news cycle. The port was about to be reset. The Port Crown leak did not heal Ironhaven. It sent the city into septic shock. The consortium of Grey, the invisible, multi-headed beast whose body had been exposed, reacted not with retreat, but with fire. They unleashed their dogs. The Sawtooth Union, flush with a sudden, massive influx of offshore cash, launched a full-scale, coordinated attack on the Dry Docks Omega. It was a scorched earth policy, designed to cripple the port just as the first Helios Bureau reports were hitting the press. It was a brutal, cynical message. If we cannot own it, no one will. But the city's heart was no longer in Crown House. It was at the Salt and Ember. The diner had transformed. The neon sign, now pockmarked from a stray bullet, stayed lit 24/7, a defiant beacon in the smoke-hazed night. Mira had organized the dock workers' wives, turning the diner into a community command post. 2 booths were ripped out to make space for a field kitchen, the grill hissing day and night, turning out free meals for families displaced by the escalating violence. The smell of coffee and bacon was a stubborn anchor of normalcy in a city tearing itself apart. Cassian, his face a mask of cold fury, had accepted Mira's terms. He split his forces, a decision that went against his every instinct. "Juno, you do not leave her side," he commanded, his voice low. "The diner is the red line. It does not fall." He sent half his men to form a hard, invisible perimeter around the diner, protecting the civilian center. He took the other 4, his most trusted, and went to meet the Sawtooths at the docks. But this time, he wore a button-sized camera on his lapel, feeding a live, encrypted signal to a laptop Juno had bolted under the kitchen's order window. Mira, her face streaked with sweat and flour, now served coffee with one hand while directing a street war with the other. The battle ignited the sky. Drones, paid for by the consortium, dropped chemical flares that bathed the docks in a flickering, sickly green light. Gunfire erupted, a chaotic echoing roar. An ambulance, trying to reach a wounded fisherman, was pinned down by gunfire from a warehouse. Mira, seeing the crisis on a local news feed, grabbed a walkie-talkie. "Sal, tell them to back up. Use the wind alley behind the old ice house. It's too narrow for the armored trucks to follow. Go now." She knew every shortcut, every hidden street, every alley that smelled of salt and rust. She was guiding the city's healers through the lulls in the fighting. The war came to her door. The diner's back entrance burst open, and 2 sawtooth thugs spilled in, their eyes wide with adrenaline, eager to be the ones to break the sanctuary. Before the first man could aim his weapon, Juno moved. She was a silent blur from the dry pantry. A 20-pound bag of flour exploded against the man's chest, a white cloud blinding him. He gasped, inhaling a lungful of fine powder. The second man raised his pistol toward Mira. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the heavy, broken cast iron handle she used to prop the storage door. She swung it, not at his head, but a low, brutal strike against his wrist. The sound of bones snapping was sharp and clean. The gun clattered to the linoleum. Mira stood over him, her chest heaving, the iron bar held ready. "No guns!" she panted, her voice shaking but absolute. "Not in here!" Juno disarmed the first man, and they were both zip-tied before the cook at the grill even turned around. The red line had held. On the laptop screen, Cashin's feed was a dizzying blur of motion. He was hunting the head of the snake. He cornered the new sawtooth leader in the main processing bay, under a massive, silent gantry crane. The man was a giant, his face obscured by a crude mask made of interlocking shark's teeth. The fight was primal. No bullets, just the sound of fists hitting flesh. The sawtooth leader was a brute, using his weight to slam Cassian against a steel support, then back toward a deep, open vat of bubbling, anti-rust adhesive. Cashin's boot skidded, the heel catching on the metal lip. He was off balance, vulnerable. Mira watched, her knuckles white on the counter. "He's too strong. Cassian, use your speed." Then she saw it. High above them, on the crane's chassis, a small red maintenance light was blinking. Not randomly. It was a pattern. 3, 2, 3. "Juno, the grid map," she yelled. She'd seen that code on the new wiring diagrams Cassian's team had installed. It was the remote override. "He's trying to trap you. He's using the crane." Mira ran to the diner's main fuse box, which now housed a grid controller. Her finger found the breaker labeled Dry Dock Omega Sector B Crane. "Cassian, move now!" she screamed. She slammed her fist down, cutting the power. On the docks, the sawtooth leader, his hand reaching for a remote trigger to drop a 1-ton container, froze as the lights on his controller died. That split second of confusion was a fatal mistake. Cassian exploded upward. He was no longer a brawler, he was a surgeon. A palm heel strike to the throat, a blow to the solar plexus, a final, devastating elbow to the temple. The shark-tooth mask flew off, and the man collapsed. The sirens that rose were not the corrupt Aegis police. They were the armored trucks of the Helios Bureau, arriving in force. They weren't coming to save anyone. They were coming to collect the pieces. As they fanned out, Agent Cade Rowan was with them, his gun drawn from a high catwalk. A hidden consortium sniper team opened fire, not on Cassian but on the Helios agents. Rowan dove for cover, and in that moment, he made his choice. He saw Cassian's men, saw the fishermen who were watching, and saw the corporate mercenaries firing on federal agents. Rowan raised his weapon, turned, and fired back at the consortium snipers. The board had just changed. The sawtooths broke. Their leader was down. Their paymasters were firing on the feds. They ran for their escape boats, but the community was already moving. A fleet of small fishing trawlers and recreational boats, organized by Sal, surged into the channel, their engines roaring. They created a solid wall of hulls, blocking the sawtooth's escape, trapping them on the pier. The fishermen didn't fire a shot. They just held the line. In the center of the docks, Cassian stood over the unconscious sawtooth leader, the smoke of the battle swirling around him. The sun was just beginning to rise. Every eye, Helios, the fisherman, his own men was on him. This was the moment The old way, a bullet to the head, a body in the water, a message sent. The cycle of revenge. He looked at the small camera on his chest, his eyes finding Mira's across the distance. He saw the diner, the line of civilians, the red line she had drawn. He made the new choice. He stooped, zip-tied the leader's hands, and hauled him to his feet. He shoved the man, alive and defeated, toward the astonished Helios agents. He was making a public statement. The cycle was broken. In the salt and ember, Mira sagged against the counter, a sob of relief catching in her throat. She smiled, her eyes blurred with tears. Across the water, on the roof of a darkened, silent warehouse, a man who had not been part of the fight adjusted his position. A sniper. He had stayed clear of the chaos, his target singular. He settled the rifle stock against his shoulder, looking through a high-powered scope. He bypassed the docks, the agents, the fishermen. He focused on the one, bright, warm light in the chaos. He centered the crosshairs on the front window of the Salt and Ember. He found her, a tired woman in a gray apron, smiling in relief. The red laser dot, a tiny crimson insect, crawled onto the gray wool of Mira's apron, settling over her heart. She was smiling, her eyes still on the laptop feed, her body sagging in relief from the battle's end. On the docks, Cassian saw it through his camera. He wasn't watching the fight. He was watching the feed, watching her. The red dot was invisible to her, but on his screen, it was a glaring prophecy. His voice roared, not through the comms, but from his own throat, a raw, primal sound down. Juno, hardwired for reaction, did not look. She launched herself from the pantry, a blur of motion. She hit Mira in a flying tackle, their bodies crashing to the linoleum floor behind the solid oak counter. A millisecond later, the sound of a high-velocity rifle cracked the dawn. The bullet punched through the diner's front window, crossed the room exactly where Mira had been standing, and obliterated the large, industrial coffee percolator. The machine exploded in a cloud of scalding water, shrapnel, and superheated steam. Cassian was already moving. He scanned the rooftops opposite the diner, his eyes searching for the glint of sunlight on glass. He saw it. A faint flash from the roof of the old textile warehouse, 600 yards out. He was sprinting, his men flanking him. "He's on the textile roof, southeast corner," he yelled into his comms. In the diner, Mira scrambled up, her face stinging from the steam. She grabbed the walkie-talkie. She knew that roof. "Cassian, no. The main ladder is a kill box. He'll be watching it. Take the external access. Technical ladder 4, by the water tower. The wind off the channel will cover your sound." She was looking at a schematic of the docks she'd taped to the kitchen wall, her mind mapping the battlefield. Cassian took the ladder, ascending the 4 stories in a silent, controlled burn. He emerged onto the tarred roof. The sniper was there, a man in full tactical gear, already packing his rifle, a consortium professional. The man saw Cassian and raised a sidearm, but Cassian was too fast, his foot striking the man's wrist, sending the pistol skittering away. Cassian slammed him against the parapet wall. The sniper laughed, his voice muffled by a balaclava. "You see, Ironhaven never changes. You just move the pieces." Cassian looked at the man. This ghost paid to kill the one light in the city, the old Cassian, the man from Lennox Island, would have thrown him from the roof. Instead, he picked up the expensive carbon fiber sniper rifle. He didn't aim it, he broke it. Snapping the stock over his knee and tossing the pieces, he grabbed the sniper by the front of his vest and forced him to look down. The man's eyes widened. Below, the battle was over. But in front of the diner, the fishermen and the dock workers were forming a human chain, passing buckets of water to put out a small fire the sniper's bullet had started. They were protecting their diner. "The city changes," Cassian said, his voice a low, cold promise. "When we stop treating people like data and start treating them like people." Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Helios agents, led by Cade Rowan, swarmed the roof. They grabbed the disarmed sniper. Rowan looked at Cassian, the man he'd been hunting. He saw the broken rifle. He saw the intact breathing community below. He turned to his men, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "The target is the sniper. Drago is a cooperating witness." He looked back at Cassian, a curt, profound nod. "Today, I stand with the diner." The storm broke. With the consortium's hired gun in custody and their connection to the attack exposed, the House of Cards collapsed. The Ironhaven Ledger, protected by Helios, published Port Crown Part 2, The Money Trail. The Transportation Commissioner resigned by noon. The Consortium of Grey, their names and assets exposed to federal seizure, pulled out of Ironhaven, their grip broken. The crown, tarnished and heavy, had finally fallen into the sea. Dawn broke. Clean and smelling of rain, the Salt and Ember opened on time. The broken window was boarded up, but the coffee was fresh. Mira, her hands aching, was handing out free cups to the volunteers cleaning the street. The bell above the door chimed. Cassian Drago walked in. He was alone. No guards, no crew. He looked like just another man, his face bruised, his clothes torn. He walked to the counter, and Mira met him there. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, heavy silver coin. He placed it on the counter. It was an old fisherman's custom, paying the wind, an offering of thanks to the sea for a safe return. Mira looked at the coin, then at him. He did not go down on 2 knees. He went down on 1, a gesture not of supplication, but of grounding. He looked up at her, his dark eyes stripped of all their shadows, leaving only a raw, terrifying honesty. He said the 9 words that mattered. I choose a lifetime of fixing this. If you choose me. Mira looked at his hands, resting on his knee, the hands that had killed, that had bled, that had fought, the hands that had guided her through the soup, that had held her in the storm. They were calloused and scarred, but they were perfectly, absolutely steady. She did not answer. She reached out and took his hands, lifting them. She pressed his rough knuckles to her cheek, closing her eyes. We choose this city first, she whispered, her voice thick. Then we choose each other, every morning. The next week, there was a ceremony. A new sign was hung, Salt and Ember Community Table. Across the street, a massive banner was unfurled on a chain-link fence. Future home of the Neo-Dock Clean Storage Initiative. Construction had begun. Mira stood by the new sign, and Cassian kissed her in the bright morning sun. It was not a kiss of desperation or survival. It was warm, slow, and certain, tasting not of rain but of fresh waffles and the clean, salty air of a new day. The changes rippled outward. Helios, in an unprecedented move, invited Mira Vale to sit on the new Citizen Oversight Committee for the port. She was a volunteer. Juno Pike, her own future secured, started a free weekly self-defense class for the women of the docks. And Agent Cade Rowan filed a formal, internal request to investigate the Orpheus Task Force and its ties to the Consortium of Grey. The city was breathing again. Months later, the diner was quiet. It was long past midnight, the last customer gone. In the kitchen, an old radio played a scratchy, slow song. Cassian, his sleeves rolled up, was washing dishes, the steam rising around him. Mira was wiping down the long Formica counter, her movements practiced and rhythmic. He dried his hands, walked up behind her, and gently took the rag from her hand. He turned her around, pulling her close. They did not speak. They just moved. A slow, easy dance in the middle of the empty diner, their foreheads touching. Outside, the sea, the great constant heart of Ironhaven, beat a steady rhythm against the new piers. The city was not fixed, but it was healing. It had been changed, not by bullets, but by their hands. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below to say hello and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Story, and like this video. If you enjoyed it, please support us by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people. We will see you in the next one.